But this is the first time I've seen a central bank come out and say silver is now going to be accumulated as a priority and in an asset that I view as the most undervalued on the planet, for real, on every level, supply, demand, and increased usage in green, digital, military, you name it. It's a big deal for silver. Seeing the crumbs that have been laid at my feet and everyone's feet since 2019, 2020, putting them together, going out on a limb publicly and saying it and watching it happen has, on one hand, been kind of exhilarating. Yeah, I got it right. On the other hand, it's very frightening as a father of 3 kids watching the world unfold in less than an ideal manner. And as we take a look at everything unfolding, we see the central banks, as you mentioned, who have been buying gold and silver at a level really the world's never seen before. Much of this accumulation has been done kind of on the sly. You look at, and I'll get to your question, but I want to lay the foundation. You look at Saudi Arabia, they got caught importing 160 metric tons of gold, didn't report it to the IMF, but the import-export numbers caught it coming out of Switzerland. Oh, we made a mistake, so to speak. China has been buying gold for as long as, as long as I've been doing this for 35 years. And all along, their numbers were stuck at 1,200 metric tons. Everyone said you can never believe anything they say. Then they start accumulating more over the last 18 months in a row or whatnot of positive figures in accumulation. And then they stop for a few months and everyone's saying, look, the Chinese have stopped. No, they haven't. They're buying it through a proxy bank like the PBOC uses commercial banks to buy directly from the refiners in South Africa and Switzerland. That doesn't get reported to the IMF. If the PLC, the People's Liberation Army, buys on behalf of the country, they don't report it to the IMF. China's flying all around the world buying unrefined doré bars and concentrate in silver, paying double what the Western refiners or the Western companies will pay for it and bringing it back and refining it themselves. That doesn't get accounted or reported to the IMF. And so when we talk about the amount of, and by the way, China is the second largest producer of silver in the world. And so all of these countries, and Russia included, not only do they understand the importance of commodities in this new system we're moving into, where he or she who has the commodities makes the rules, but they're also trying to accumulate more than they're letting on to in a very big way. India has imported 850 million ounces of silver over the last couple of years, and you got dig to try and find it. They've probably imported a lot more. And so what I'm getting at is that to see a country like Russia come out and say that they are going to start to accumulate platinum, palladium, and silver, it's the first time I've ever seen a country actually mention silver in terms of their stockpile. We see them accumulating it. We see China accumulating it. We see India accumulating it. None of them ever made a declaration that indeed this is what we are doing. And so when you realize that these countries have been accumulating in massive quantities, where, as I said, China's buying unrefined silver directly from the miners, paying double what the West will in Latin America, so they can bring it home and refine it, and it's kind of off the exchanges, no one sees it. This is emblematic of what we should expect to see all around the world. And now you have a country come out and actually say, we're going to start accumulating silver. It's the first I've seen of it. But, you look at an exchange like the LBMA, Andy, and, it's the most widely traded exchange on the planet. 8.1% of the entire silver float was delivered off the exchange in the month of August. So these countries are also draining our exchanges by using the suppression of the Western paper market in an effort to drain the exchanges. And this is something that I think you will start to see accelerate in a meaningful way. You will begin to see the silver market. Sorry about that. Every time I start a podcast, my dogs want to say hello. But you will begin to see things happen like central banks openly admitting that they are taking possession of metal and purchasing it, let alone the opaque manner in which they've been doing it all along. And people will wake up to this realization that, my goodness, these players have been buying for a long time, when it finally comes out that it's obvious. Because if you were trying to reposition yourself out of dollars and treasuries like we're seeing, and instead of recycling into treasuries, recycling into commodities, it would do you're doing yourself a disservice to tell the world about it. You want to accumulate as much as you can before we see this revaluation, before we see the drive to accumulate metals. And you could say the exact same thing about the West. Now, I'm not saying we're accumulating it, but why don't we ever talk about how much gold we have at Fort Knox? Why do we not audit it? Why, when Ron Paul wants to audit it, is it shut down? So I guess what I'm saying is, all of these countries have vested interest in keeping, quiet about the real numbers. Want to let us on to, yeah, we're getting some, but this is the first time I've seen a central bank come out and say silver is now going to be accumulated as a priority, and in an asset that I view as the most undervalued on the planet, for real, on every level: supply, demand, and increased usage in green, digital, military, you name it. It's a big deal for silver. It's a very big deal for a market that is trading massively rehypothecated, where on the LBMA, and I'll shut up and listen to what you have to say about this, but on the LBMA, they have openly admitted recently that, look, they say we have 800 million ounces of silver, of which 500 million belong to the ETFs. 300 million is the float. It's the lowest amount they've had since they've started keeping records ever. And this is a 140-year-old exchange. I don't know how far back their record keeping goes, but what I am saying is they openly admit to trading 292 million ounces of silver per day of 300 million every day, 5 days a week. But the interesting thing about that number is they also say, well, that number's 10 times understated, because we only report the final settlement numbers, not all the trades that it took to get there. And so you're talking trading 2.9 billion with a B ounces of silver per day, 3.5 times the annual global mine supply, which is 90+% paper sold by the bullion banks that have a vested interest in suppressing the price, and have for a long time. And these countries, namely India, Russia, and China, have realized it doesn't take missiles and stealth bombers to beat the United States. What it takes is accessing the back door that no one ever did. No one ever stood for delivery my whole career. Nobody did. And now we see 8.1% of the entire silver float on the LBMA delivered in the month of August. How much longer, when they tell us it's the lowest amount they've ever had on record, how much longer can they take that? And this is why those countries who know what we're doing, they understand what we're doing, even the new BRICS grain exchange, the guy who's running it said, we produce and consume more wheat than the West does, but the price is controlled on COMEX. And when this new exchange is in place, that will change. They know what we're doing on all of the world's commodities. We control it. We suppress it. We can make oil -40 a barrel like we did in 2020. All of this plays right into the hands of the global South, who's using that suppression and other means, and now openly talking about it, to drain the shelves of what is, I think, the most important thing in the world to do, and that is to accumulate commodities in favor of treasuries. And we're seeing that happen in a massive pace. Yeah, a lot of people were expecting a common settlement currency to come out of the BRICS in Johannesburg last year. And I had the good fortune last year at Rick Rule's meeting to spend a couple hours on a boat cruise drinking cocktails with James Rickards, who at the time said that would happen. And he also said that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union would join the BRICS. I've said that for 3 years, never put a time frame on it, but I said all three of those things indeed would happen. Now, that none of them happened. And he's not wrong. Even the president of, the president of, it'll come to me in a moment, called for a summit to bring the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union into the BRICS. The president of, I can't believe I'm having a senior moment. It'll come to me halfway through this presentation. But one of the presidents said, yeah, this should happen, and it will happen. And the BRICS will issue a common settlement currency. It didn't. What was said in last year in Johannesburg, Belarus, there it is, the president of Belarus said, let's get these guys, these two organizations. By the way, The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the largest regional financial and military organization in the world, which Iran and Saudi Arabia have recently joined. And the Eurasian Economic Union is all the former Russian or Soviet countries and in Stan, like Kazakhstan. They're all in this, and they're all really tied together very incestuously. They'll all end up joining the BRICS, along with most of the folks in the Belt Road Initiative. Anyways, I digress. So what came out of that meeting was they said, look, let's all go back to the drawing board, and let's come back to the meeting in Russia in October next year and present our findings on a common settlement currency. In the meantime, let's all trade in local currencies. And we've seen that. We're seeing China buy corn and soybeans from Brazil instead of United States and Australia, where they canceled much of their contracts. And they're paying for it in the yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. What is gold? It's the only other tier 1 reserve asset as reclassified by the Bank of International Settlements. Let's remember the BIS in this discussion here, because the BIS does things in a very cryptic way. And you know, the BIS is really, I think, behind a lot of this stuff. If we go back to, I'm going to get to your question again, but I like to backfill. Sure. Go back to 2017, the Bundesbank in Germany out of nowhere said, give us back our gold, to the US and to the Bank of England. And it was weird because gold had fallen for 6 years in a row. They had been trying for 2-3 years, finally made a big stink about it. It was an article in the Wall Street Journal. Shortly after that, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, Poland, Czech National Bank, Dutch National Bank, they all said the same thing. Yeah. And then in 2018, those same banks bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years previously combined, and doubled it in 2019. And then coincidentally, the BIS said, yes, gold is now the only other tier 1 asset. So obviously they were clued into what was coming. So let's fast forward to where we are now. We have this meeting now, after a year of trading rupee for ruble and yuan for corn that's then traded back into gold. I mean, they're trading with one another outside the dollar. That is for sure. And we can see this accelerating, right? The largest contract, a huge contract in Iran to modernize their biggest airport was awarded to China. They're paying for it in oil. Gold and oil have been remonetized, and they're certainly worth more than the currencies that purchase them. And let's keep that in mind too as we go forward. Anyways, so about 3-4 weeks ago, coinciding with the G7 meeting in Italy, the BRICS had a meeting. They've had up to 200 meetings beginning of the year leading up to this big meeting in October. And there was one in particular in Novograd, Russia, where the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was invited to, coinciding with the G7. He was invited to that as well. He told the folks in the West, can't make it, busy, and then sent his finance ministers to the meeting in Novograd. 3 things came out of that meeting that I would like to discuss as it pertains to what will we hear next week. And number one was that we find out that 59 countries have formally thrown their hat into the ring to join the BRICS. 59. That doesn't mean that 59 will immediately be accepted. We'll find out if any or which ones they are, and if indeed they have been accepted. They keep stuff really close to the vest. But more importantly, what we saw was an admission by a woman named Dilma Rousseff. Dilma Rousseff is the former president of Brazil, and she's the head of the BRICS New Development Bank. This is no small fry. This is a very, very important woman. And she came out and said, look, had 2 meetings on the sidelines with Sergei Glaziev and Putin. Now, I've done 5,000 videos since 2019 talking about the BRICS, and all of them center around a new currency because Sergei Glaziev has told us that in numerous occasions that this is what they are hedging towards, and he would say a basket of commodities and a basket of BRICS plus currencies. Well, interestingly enough, the meeting between Sergei, Putin, and Dilma Rousseff, she claims, has been agreed upon in principle. In principle, they have agreed upon a new settlement currency called the unit. And the unit will be traded over Project Embridge. Let's start with Project Embridge. I've talked about it for over a year now. It is a cross-border payment system designed by China, Hong Kong, United Arab Emirates, and Thailand. And it allows for these countries to trade with one another in central bank digital currencies outside of the ability of the SWIFT system to screw with it. And if you take the world's gross domestic product, Andy, and give it a percent of 100%, the countries that comprise 99% of that GDP globally all have a CBDC in operation or development. And so CBDCs, unfortunately, is where we are moving to. In fact, our country does as well. As the #2 economic advisor to the U.S. White House, Lael Brainerd, modern monetary theorist, used to be at the Boston Fed and helped develop the CBDC with MIT when Biden fast-tracked it when he first got into office by executive order. So CBDCs are coming. And if you look at the first trade that was done last year, I talked a lot about it. It was a test trade between China and the UAE. China bought gold and oil on the two trades using mBridge, their digital yuan. And I do believe gold and oil are being remonetized. They are comprising more and more and more in the way of trade settlements outside the dollar, right? So we see that mBridge, first and foremost, and what Delma said is, this will not be a common BRICS currency. Everyone will have their own central bank digital currency. Everyone will be in charge of maintaining their own monetary economy, keeping their house in order, and not worrying so much about the United States, but their own ecosystem. Each country will have to maintain, prudent economics. But for settlement, if they want to settle in something outside of, I have enough rupee, I have enough ruble, I have enough, yuan, I'd like to go in a different direction, and I'd like to take the settlement currency. It's called the unit. And she said this has been agreed upon in principle. It too will be traded over Project Embridge, and it is a basket of 60% BRICS plus currencies, as Blaziev has told us, no more than 30% of any one currency comprising the basket. But instead of a basket of commodities, which would be too hard to balance all the time, and, wheat goes bad, and, how are you going to do it with oil? And so you're just using gold, which is what? The only other tier 1 reserve asset as defined by who? The Bank of International Settlements. Well, guess what? The Bank of International Settlements is standing behind Project Embridge, and guess who the 5th full-time member now is on Project Embridge? The 5th full participant is Saudi Arabia. They are now the 5th full participant, and guess what? The dollar is not compatible with Project Embridge. So you have a situation where the largest producer of oil, the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, the head of OPEC, in essence, is now a full participant in mBridge. We have about 30 other countries that have signed up in terms of observational participant. We're waiting to see how it all shakes out, in other words. So you have China, Hong Kong, UAE, Thailand, Saudi Arabia with backing of the BIS.